Diera, it's so good to have you joining me on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Robyn, this is so special to me. You and I go back years now at this point. So I'm so excited to go to all the places that we're going to go today.
Oh my gosh, I know it's crazy. It's been a couple of years and we still haven't met in person, but one day it's probably going to be in Hawaii, Hawaii or Kelowna, but I'm excited. And I'm really excited to just have you on as a guest today because you've obviously got a really, really powerful story. And from working with so many women around the world, all building jewelry businesses specifically and other businesses, but mainly jewelry businesses, you know, a lot of these women are going through really different challenging situations in their personal lives, in relationships, in making decisions, which all impacts their quality of life. It all impacts how they show up in their business as well. And so I'm really excited for us to dive in today. But before we do that, do you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself to our listeners and share a little bit of your story and kind of how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I could talk forever about that one, but I'll give you I'll give you the short version. I grew up in Hawaii, which is obviously a beautiful place, and I have a ton of gratitude towards my parents and my childhood and the way that I was raised. I think because I grew up on an island in the middle of nowhere, I naturally just carried this mindset of like I'm a little bit, I feel a little bit different. And so going through childhood feeling that way, but then also carrying such an intense pull to want to belong, as I think, we all carry that as human beings, especially as children. It's like an innate need to want to fit in and belong. And so for me, it was sort of this constant like pull of really like wanting to be myself, yet also feeling this intense desire to fit in and belong. And so I think because of that, as I got older into my teenage years, I kept my voice quiet for a long time, and some of my like, maybe more controversial opinions and things like that, I kind of pushed that down and buried that. And Hawaii also has a very strong sense, because of our Asian culture and influence here, to conform and to kind of stay in line and do as you're told. And so that existed within me as well. And so I did all the things I thought I was supposed to do, get good grades in school. And I say all that, I was still a pretty wild, rebellious teenager in my old ways. But still, like, got good grades in school, went to college, met an amazing man, got married, had a baby. And then one day I woke up, I think I was 30, 31, and did not understand why I was so unhappy. And through a lot of deep inner work and, making decisions outside of integrity and fumbling around and trying to figure it all out, there were some really, really intense years right after I became a mom. And, looking back on it now, reflecting and, through so much processing and internal, just, going inward and getting deep and really trying to understand myself and where all of that was coming from, motherhood for me really was like the necessary moment for me to take a really hard look at how I was living and how I was showing up, and all of the ways that I had spent years of my life pushing down that like inner voice, that like intuitive voice, and just continuing down the path and doing the things that like I thought were going to bring happiness. And then once I had all the things that I thought would lead to that, I stepped away from my career to be a full-time mom. I had an amazing house and husband. I had all the things. I had all the external things, but internally I felt so lost. And so through that own like my personal journey of discovering and awakening and the death rebirth. There's so many different words and language you can put to it now today. Really recognizing that those things were no longer for me. And
Mm.
it was messy, and we can certainly dive into all of that. But I eventually separated from my husband, moved out of our house. Years later, got divorced, and now I'm a single mom. I have my own business. I work one on one with women, and really like helping them come home to who they really are inside. And a lot of it is the exact path and journey that I followed myself. And now, today, I feel more me than ever before. I no longer carry that fear of saying the wrong thing. I fully step into every single one of my desires, and I communicate that openly and vulnerably and really raw, even if sometimes it's still messy and I'm figuring it out. I'm still human at the end of the day, and I still make
Yeah.
mistakes. But I have so much gratitude for my past and the places that I've been, even though it was really, really hard and really messy at times. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a powerful story. And I mean, I I obviously know a lot more to the story than what you just shared there, Dira. But what I love is that I think you are putting into words what a lot of women can't. Because I mean, I work with women who are going through this essentially an awakening, whether it's waking up from like, wow, I've spent 10 to 20 years in my corporate career thinking this is going to make me happy. And here I am, like essentially a slave to the system, working crazy hours, hardly having that time to live the life that I'm wanting to live. I don't have the sense of purpose I thought I may have. And now I'm having to reevaluate. Or, we have a lot of mothers as well who, when you become a mother, I think you reevaluate your priorities and you relook at your life, and the way you've done things before, or maybe the way you've built your business before, now doesn't serve you. And it's really, really hard when you've worked and invested so many years into a relationship, into a job, into a business, to get to a certain point to then recognize, like, oh no, something's not right here. And I think what a lot of women do is they feel very alone in feeling that way, because we don't see people posting about what's actually happening on social media. I mean, even your Instagram, I think you've spoken about this before, like nobody would have been able to tell from what you were posting when you were going through like a separation and when you were having these doubts. Like, from Instagram, it doesn't, you just don't share that because you're not going to share what's actually going on when you're navigating through that. Nobody owes that to anyone else. But it makes women feel really alone when they are going through those feelings, because they're like, wow, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling this way? And they don't recognize, like, there's a lot of women going through this. And, this is kind of essentially you waking up to your inner voice and that intuition and starting to listen to yourself, which I think, the school system, working for other people for so many years, stops us from listening to our intuition in so many ways. And it's really hard when you start to recognize that, and then you have to start tuning in. And sometimes you're not really going to like what it has to say. And so, talk us a little bit through that season when you started waking up to, like, wow, I have everything on the outside. Like, my life is essentially perfect on paper. I have this amazing husband, I have my amazing daughter, I have this gorgeous home, I'm in Hawaii, I have like the job that I'd always wanted and worked towards, and I'm not feeling happy. Walk us through like the feelings and sort of that pivotal moment where you suddenly like started listening to your intuition and recognized, like, you know what, I need to make a change here.
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing I want to say is like, as you touched on this, picture perfect story that we tell through the lens of social media can be, and this is where, comparing your life to somebody else's life can be so detrimental, because you have no idea what somebody is carrying and walking through on the inside. There were so many people in my life that were shocked when we decided to separate because, again, everything looked so perfect on the outside. And we were living in LA and we had moved back to Hawaii, and we had only been here less than a year when all of this unraveling started happening. And for me, because I had lived a lifetime and, essentially multiple lifetimes, really not listening to that inner voice, pushing her down, numbing, through different, whether that was, alcohol, and not taking it too far, but just using that as a modality to feel less. And all of those things stacked on top of each other. And again, you touched on like the school system where we're not taught how to feel. We're actually, really disconnected from our body, where we live up here in our head. We don't really live and make decisions from our heart. I know it's shifted a little bit, but from a really young age, elementary school, primary school, as a young child, we are really disconnected from our body and from our intuition. So for me, it was multiple lifetimes of living that way. So when that voice would come up, it was so much easier, because that had been my conditioning and my cycle, to just bury it and push it down and continue living the way that I had been living for so long. And there's a quote that like really, really impacted my life, and I come back to it a lot. And I think what I'd imagine a lot of people can relate to this is, move or the universe moves you. And
Mm.
so you can sit in your level of comfort, contentment, and still be very, whether that's, a job, a relationship, whatever the thing is, you can sit in that place for a pretty long time and just live sort of a, mediocre, not super happy, not completely like depressed. You're just sort of in this middle baseline. You can stay there for a pretty long time until, something happens that kind of shakes things up. And for me, I had felt really, really unseen and unloved in my marriage for a long time. And that's not to put all the blame on my daughter's dad at all. I co-created that dynamic, absolutely, in our relationship. And also feeling that way for so long and feeling just really low. When somebody from my past leaned in, I leaned back into that. So I ultimately was having an affair for a little while. And that came to the surface without me sharing that news. And it came out very messy. So I say, move where the universe moves you. This was the universe being like, it's time to make a change. And the way that that erupted in my life created a tidal wave beyond just me and my daughter's dad. It affected my family, it affected friendships, it affected a lot of people. And looking back on it now, I see that it had to happen exactly as it did, because I wouldn't have gotten to that place on my own. That version of myself needed that big eruption to take place so that I could start moving myself towards the path that I was always supposed to be on. And so, my story isn't necessarily the same for everyone else. The like one thing that I say to so many of my clients and close friends is, when that voice, when that whisper starts to come in, just that's not the time where you have to make a big change or a big shift necessarily, but just start getting curious, like start asking questions, start like sitting with yourself, creating time and space to lean into it, so that so that it doesn't have to be this huge eruption of, chaos in the way that my life was. Yes, that had to be my experience and that had to be my story, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way for everyone else. And I think if you can really start tuning in and getting comfortable with trusting your intuition, and in the smallest of ways, where for a lot of people, I work with women that when I talk about intuition, they're like, I have no idea what that sounds like. I don't even know, like, I don't think my intuition talks to me. And I get that because, again, we're so conditioned to stay up here in our head. We're not listening from our heart. So that voice doesn't feel safe because you've ignored her for your entire life. But when you do start making space and you slow down and you start listening in like the smallest ways, I always say, like, it can come, that voice can ping in like a way of, oh, don't leave that cup here, or like turn left here, when you would naturally be like making a right turn. And it's just those like little signs, when you start listening and making those little shifts, that's when that voice can start to get a little bit louder and feel a little bit more safe to start speaking up.
Yeah, this is so, so powerful, dear. And I want to dive in a little deeper because what you shared, earlier about, um, essentially, you need to make the move or the universe is gonna make that move for you. I've seen that play out in my life and clients' lives, in very different ways, actually. And essentially, what I've seen is it kind of shifts things for you sometimes so that you kind of hit rock bottom. And I see rock bottom as a real blessing in disguise because, I've gone through rock bottom and it kind of sets you up to stop caring about what other people think, stop putting other people's opinions on a pedestal above your own, start really getting clear on what you want, because at this point you really have nothing to lose, and then go out there and do the cringy, embarrassing, much needed things that you need to do to step into that version of yourself or that life or that business or that relationship that you're really wanting. And so I've seen that play out in terms of, clients who've lost their job at their corporate job and they're like, this is the worst thing ever. No, now they've hit rock bottom. Now they have to fully commit to their jewelry business, which is ultimately what they want. And now they actually start like seeing things shift. Or, it's like relationships where something happens where it's like there is no going back here. We've kind of, something has happened to essentially make sure, like, hey, as much good as there was in this relationship, it's now over, we're moving forward, and the universe has helped you kind of make sure that we're going to stay on course for that. So it's really interesting. And I think what you said about some people not even knowing how to listen to their intuition or what that voice sounds like, I really want to talk more about this because I think there's also going to be people listening who are like, okay, but how do I tell the difference between my intuition guiding me towards a better life, or fear or doubt or scarcity mindset, or, just avoidance showing up in my life? How do we differentiate between the two?
Yeah, such a good question. The feeling for me, so when we talk about intuition and that inner voice, and, for some people, this may sound woo woo or hippie or, whatever word or language you want to attach to it. I just want to emphasize that this is energy. And this is an energetic exchange that is happening internally within you and everything that you touch in the external world. And it's all connected. And so I really believe that everything is either based in fear or love. We make decisions based in fear or love. We live our life based in fear or love. And that feeling connected to your intuition, that voice is always going to feel like love. It's going to feel like opening, whereas fear is going to feel tense. Fear is going to feel like closing. You're going to feel that like anxious, heavy feeling in your chest. Whereas intuition is going to feel, while it still may feel scary, because for a lot of us, it's going to be a big shift. It's going to be a big leap. It's going to be a risk. It is going to be the unknown, which, yes, can feel scary, but it's not going to feel, you're not going to feel like closing and shutting down. You're going to want to feel curious about it. It's going to feel more expansive. And again, not to say it's not going to feel scary. It's going to feel, sometimes it's going to feel really big. And also, though, it's going to feel like it's coming from your heart. It's going to feel like just this deep sense like a knowing, and maybe you've pushed it down for a really, really long time, but there's been a part of you that's always known. And I say that because
Mhm.
for me, there was a part of me that always knew. As I spoke about my childhood, I felt different. I really did at a really, really young age. But there were so many walls and pieces of armor that I built up over time to protect myself so that I felt safe, so that I could fit in and I could belong with everybody else. But we're not meant to belong. I mean, I say that we're not meant to conform. We're meant to stand out. The human experience, why it's so beautiful, is we're all uniquely ourselves. We're all so different from each other. And if we
Mhm.
can come to a place where we fully embrace that, that's when you really start to make decisions that are right for you. And so it I just really want to emphasize how, like, because I don't want to, it's easy for me and you to say all this from like the other side.
Yeah.
We've hit rock bottom, and we've moved past it. So it's like, yeah, listen to us. We're way up here on this mountaintop because we've overcome. I also just really want to say that, like, I was on the floor crying, having no idea where I was going to go. Like, I had stepped away from my career. I had no money. I had a child. Like, my life was so reliant on my family unit at that point. Like, I had no idea where I was going to go next. And that feeling can feel super overwhelming. And I think that can be where the confusion of, is this fear or is this an intuitive feeling?
Mm.
It's so in those moments, it's just trusting that knowing. It's trusting that, yeah, I've been feeling this way for a really long time. And what is one small thing I can do to keep moving forward? And sometimes that one small thing is just getting out of bed in the morning and like
Mm.
hydrating. It's like, and then it gets a little bit, you kind of level up each time when you feel a little more comfortable, and then that just grows and expands from there.
Yeah, I really like how you shared, Dira, that you don't just like have to listen to your intuition and go like make a massive change right off the get go. It's about like listening to it, being like, oh, okay, I'm hearing like, maybe I need to transition into my business, or this relationship isn't for me, or I don't know, whatever it is that's going on in your life, you just start listening, and you don't have to suddenly go make a big life changing decision. You can start with little, like, take some time to just listen and just acknowledge it. And then you can start with those little steps, like you shared, which could be just getting out of bed, and could be just like, little things that are going to start shifting. If you're in a job you don't enjoy, it's like starting the hunt for a new job. If it's like, oh, I really want to build this business. It's starting, what's the first step? What do I need to do first? And just starting to take baby steps towards that. Now, one thing that you share that I think is going to deeply resonate with our listeners is how, over the years, you kind of build this armor over you. And I did the exact same thing. I think most people do this because it is a form of fitting in. And when we fit in, we are protecting ourselves from judgment, criticism, you know, all of the bad stuff, but we're also protecting ourselves from all of the good stuff. And essentially, the people who do the best in business have learned to take those walls down and recognize like what makes them unique is their superpower in business. And it's so interesting, even with my clients. One of my clients recently posted a reel, and she wanted us to take a look at it on Facebook first, and she popped it in there. And we can see her personality starting to really shine through. And this is after a year of posting consistently. And now I can see like the walls are starting to drop. Now I can see like the true version of her coming in. It's a little quirky, it's a little woo woo, it's a little fun. And it's like that masking that's been going on for the past year and a half, which is so, so normal. It takes time to slowly start dropping those masks. And it takes little steps of like being like, okay, I'm going to post this, which is a little out there, and let's see the feedback. And the feedback was like, we want more. We want more of this. And so it's so fascinating, the whole thing of us masking and like essentially trying to fit in when actually that's not going to drive authentic relationships or friendships. It's not going to drive us feeling deeply connected to ourselves. And it doesn't help us in business at all. And so I'm really glad like that you shared that. And so for somebody listening to this who's like, okay, I don't know. I think maybe I've been listening to my intuition a little. Maybe I completely forgot she existed. But they feel disconnected from that inner voice. What would you say are some practices or tools that they can kind of start to use to strengthen their intuition?
Yeah, such a good question, especially because this can feel super overwhelming. Like we live in age of information overload. There are
Mm-hmm.
so many different tools and modalities and places you can go and lean on for information. And so the thing that I always emphasize is just make sure that you're really getting curious with what feels good for you. Like I always say start with taking inventory. Take inventory of your life. Where there's a few different, I think journaling is a really great tool because a lot of times making sure you're releasing the expectation of like I have to write perfectly, like just allowing yourself. In the beginning when I first started journaling, I would set a 10-minute timer because otherwise I would cut myself short. I'd be like, yeah, that's enough. But really setting like a specific time attached to it allows the thoughts, because in the beginning you're kind of in your head of like, I want this to sound good, I want this to make sense, and then over time you really get out of your head and you drop into your heart and things just flow, and a lot more clarity can come through that. And so when I say take inventory, it's like pay attention to every piece of your life that either drains or gives you energy. And that can be your job, that can be a relationship, that can be a friendship, that can be even a workout that you're doing, that can be food, like that can be literally anything. But I think the biggest pieces really are like, what does your work look like? What does your relationships look like? And for me, during that, like, sort of awakening moment, I shed almost everything in my life. All of my close friendships, like they fell away naturally, and they actually, for the most part, kind of made that decision of like I would like space again, like move where the universe moves you. Like in my life, that was kind of the force that happened. But you can do this much sooner if you're starting to feel that pull internally. You can take inventory and you can ask yourself, are these relationships giving me energy? Because if they're not, that's pulling you away from who you are inside, and that's not creating space for you to hear that voice. So once you start
Yeah.
tuning into all of those things, and maybe, and the hard truth is maybe you need to cut some cords with some of the relationships in your life, and it may not be, a romantic relationship, maybe yes, but a lot of times we carry these friendships. I certainly was, because they were childhood friendships. I just didn't see myself ever not having them in my life. And now I can say on the other side of that, keeping those relationships was was like not allowing the real, true, deep, connected soulmate level friendships that I was craving so deeply. There was no space for that. So once I removed the relationships that were no longer serving me, and yes, again, I went through a lonely chapter. There was some really hard times when I was by myself for like a year. But then as I started doing all of the things and really leaning into what felt good for me in all aspects of my life, the right people started coming in. And now, I mean, I've never had this before, but I have, a handful of like soulmate girlfriends that I'm so close and connected to. And I know you mentioned community at some point, like that that creates a ripple effect into every aspect of your life. If you're fulfilled, especially as women, when you have female friendships where there's no competition, there's just love and support and cheering each other on, like anything is possible. So I say all of
Mhm.
that because it is so important to sometimes shed the things that are not serving you anymore so that you can create space for everything else to come in.
Yeah, I'm so glad we're talking about this, Dear. I actually had a very similar conversation with one of my clients the other day, and I really resonate with this as well because the reality is when you start building a business, which a lot of our listeners are doing, they're either in the very starting stages or they're 5 or 10, or even we have people listening who are 20, 30 years into building their business. But the reality is what I love most about business is it's essentially a pressure cooker for growth. So yes, we're building a business, we're making money, we're building a life of flexibility and income and freedom and purpose, which I love, but we're also growing so much as individuals. And the reality is in those first 2 years of building your business, you go through a lot of shedding. You have to let go of some friendships. And there's nothing to say like you have to kick all these people out of your life. Absolutely not. But there are sometimes relationships or friendships that aren't serving you, that are draining you, that aren't good for either of you to continue in that relationship. And sometimes people do get resentful when you start to step outside of the box they put you in.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it makes them uncomfortable because they have to then relook at their goals and their dreams and what they're doing with their life. And so there comes a time when it's like, you know what? We want to make space for the friendships that are going to work both ways for us. And then we do need to allow space maybe for friendships to just go on the back burner for a while and they can come back, or let them go and release them. And I think a lot of people really struggle with the guilt around releasing those friendships. And also the resentment that builds between those people when it's like, hey, I'm in a season of building my business. I'm in a season of growth. I'm in a season of posting cringy content on Instagram and, you know, doing all the hard work. And I don't necessarily have time to go out every weekend like I used to. And sometimes that builds resentment. And again, that's where you have to set those boundaries and be like, hey, here's my capacity. And also, if that doesn't work, you know, you release those friendships. But it's so hard to do that. And I think a lot of people try and ignore that pull or that like need to do that, because they want to be nice. They want to be nice people. And I was the same for many years. And it's one of the best realizations I think everyone listening can actually have. And I'd be curious to know your take on this, Dira. But being nice should never be the goal, because being nice to me is you are doing what you think other people need you to do and see based on like them accepting you, and you're not actually showing up authentically for yourself. You're not actually considering your needs either. So it's not something to aim for. Being a nice
Yeah.
person is not a goal. Being a genuine, being an authentic, being a kind person, for sure, like aim for that. But being a nice person should never be a goal. And I find that nice people will say yes to these friendships much longer than they should be saying yes to it. They'll say yes to jobs that for much longer and put up with like toxic environments for longer, because they think I should be a nice person. I should be doing this and this and this. And it's so hard to shift our perspective and be like, no, I don't need to be a nice person. I need to be kind. I need to be authentic. I need to be genuine to who I am. And if I don't know who I am, well, let's start getting to know ourselves a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to think that's so good, Robyn. I like to think about it in this way. And this helped me a lot as I was in that state of like unknown, and it was scary and it was overwhelming. I just really projected myself to the end of my life. And what does that version of myself, if she's looking back on the way that I lived, is she going to feel proud? Is she going to feel happy? Is she going to be proud of this version that I am right now? This like new mom in my early 30s, is she going to be happy the way that I've been living? And in that moment, the answer was no. The answer was, I am not living in alignment. I am not living in integrity. I am keeping my voice quiet. I'm burying my wants, needs, and desires so far down that I don't even know what they are anymore. And that really started giving me the confidence to at least like go within and ask myself some of those really big questions of like, okay, what do I want? And I didn't necessarily have all the answers. You're not going to. There's going to be a
Mhm.
period of like fumbling and making mistakes. And as you said, like making cringy content, like I relate to that so much. And also, it's a requirement to get there
Mhm.
because anytime you do something different or new or for the first time, we're like to have the expectation that you're going to be great at it the first time around is crazy. Again, back to comparing, like we're comparing ourselves to somebody else that's like 5, 10 years ahead of us that have been doing this thing for so much longer. But if you can really just settle into, no, I'm just going to start asking myself questions. I'm just going to start like leaning into those little moments and getting to know myself in that way of like, and yes, it's going to ruffle some feathers at first. Like if you've been nice your whole life, if you've kept the peace your whole life, which for the most part, I really had, I avoided hard conversations with every bone in my body. I was terrified of them because I had
Mhm.
such a deep need to be loved by everybody. Again, I kept myself small. As a result, the cost was keeping myself small and living outside of who I authentically was. And when I started fully stepping into myself, yeah, I pushed people away for sure. But the truth is, we're not for everybody. And the more I really started just trusting that part of myself and fully embracing it all, I was attracting the people that I wanted to attract versus I was keeping all of these relationships in my life that were so not serving me. And so now like I, can say all of this with just so much trust and like passion because
Mhm.
I know what happens when you really start doing the thing that you feel called to do, even though it's scary, even though it's cringy, even though it like there's moments of like, am I going to die if I post this? Like there really
Yeah.
is that like sort of innate feeling like it's attached to survival for so many of us.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I mean, we were talking about this earlier because I just resonate so much with everything you just shared, Diera. You know, I went for years without a sense of community, without like, feel like I did everything I could to build adult friendships, and it just never worked for me for years. It was really hard. I have a couple of friends that I made during that time, but it was just, everything was just so hard. And it's been interesting in the last like 6 months to a year how things have shifted based on, what I've grown into, where I'm at in life now. Everything feels so easy. I have this amazing community around me. I have amazing friendships, like really, like you were saying, like really aligned friendships, really supportive friendships, and just like incredible people around me who it just when you allow yourself to go through that season of finding yourself, getting clear on who you really are and growing into that person, and you allow space as well and you make the hard decisions, things shift. And it will shift for people listening with your customers as well. So often people are like, oh, what if I start posting and sharing who I really am and some customers don't like me anymore? It's okay. Like it is so okay, because for those handful of customers, or even if it's hundreds of customers you're going to lose, you're going to gain thousands more the more consistently you continue to show up as who you are, because that's what people are wanting to see and that's what people are wanting to connect with. So, you know, what I do think, and you did touch on this earlier, but I just want to dive a little deeper, Diera, because I think we're so conditioned to search for that like logical reasons for doing things, and we wanting that external validation from who knows where, like gold star for doing life right. But we're constantly looking for that. And so for somebody who's like, okay, yeah, but like I really do care what everyone thinks about me, and I like can logically say why like leaving this relationship isn't a good idea, or going and building this business. If you write out all the risks associated with building a business on paper, businesses don't make sense. Like they don't make sense. If you write out all the risks, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I think you could do the same with being like going on holiday in Hawaii. It doesn't make sense because the sharks can eat you. This like anything, we can talk ourselves out of anything.
Mm-hmm.
So how can somebody like unlearn that and just start to trust themselves more?
Mm, beautiful question. And, I just want to preface this by saying I can say some words right now. Like I can give an amazing explanation to that question. And even still, you have to go out and do it yourself. I say this with so much trust and passion and faith, and I continue to lean into this time and time again because I've seen it happen in my own life. So yes, I'm going to give you my answer to that question, but also the biggest thing that I hope somebody just walks away with is making sure that you put this into play in your own life. And then you will know where you and I are coming from. You will believe to your core. Like I believe to my core that everything I am seeking is also seeking me because I've seen it happen so many times. So the first piece really is just listening, like getting quiet. And I was just listening to, I don't know if you know Alan Watts, but he's an amazing philosopher, and he has some really like beautiful songs, like that people have created songs to his words. And he was saying the person that's always talking can never hear themselves think. And the person that's always thinking is going to miss out on how beautiful the world is. And this like what he calls the unspeakable world, which is the world that exists without like our words and language. So like, you look at something and you're like, "Oh yeah, that's a shoe, or that's a shadow, or that's a tree." And when we don't like name things and we allow space for our mind to just quiet all of that noise, that's where the like magic of the world starts to exist. And that's really where you can start to trust yourself. So I know that this may sound like a little like wild and woo woo again out there, but like for me, meditation has been huge. Going on walks have been huge. Breath work, like even just short, like 5-minute breath work has been huge. There's so many different YouTube videos out there that you can do. Awaken breath work is my favorite. They have a 5-minute free one that you can do on their website. I've used that as a tool so many times because when you just focus in on your breath. Yoga's a beautiful one. Any type of like slow movement to connect back into your body to really slow it down because we're in such a constant go. We're always moving. We're always thinking. We're thinking about the past or the future. We're not really in this present moment and we don't let ourselves get quiet enough. And so creating little moments like that in your life is when that voice is going to start coming to you. That's when you're going to start really trusting. And then when you see it happen, when you have actual proof, and that's what I'm saying is like why I'm so passionate about this is I have so much proof in my own life. Like when you ask for things and you create space, you have to create space. If you want soulmate love, but you're in a relationship or a situationship, whatever you want to call it, there's no space for soulmate love to come in. So you have to make sure that there is like you're setting the intention around the thing that you're asking for and making sure that you are doing the things for that piece to come into place. So I use that soulmate love example because that's where I'm at right now. I thought last year that that's what I wanted, but I was entertaining so many like things that were just for fun. There was no space for soulmate love to come in. I really intentionally had to be like, yeah, I'm not even going to entertain that anymore. And sometimes that's hard, especially if you've been doing something for a long period of time to make a shift like that. So it's not always this place of like you have to cut like a friendship or you have to make this big life shift. It can be just small little changes of making sure that you're creating space for that thing and creating intention behind it.
I love that so much. And, I'm even just thinking when people are building a business, it's like creating space to show up and build that business, and recognizing like what are the sacrifices I'm willing to make in the short and long term to give this business the space and the time and the energy it needs to actually stand a chance to do really well. Same thing with relationships, like you were saying, same thing with friendships. So I love that so much, Diera. This has been such a good chat. I'm really, really excited to share this with everyone. And I know we're going to have listeners who are going to feel excited to follow along and connect with you. So, where can our listeners find you and how can they support you?
Yes, I loved this so much, Robyn. You and I know, could riff on things like this for so
All
long.
day.
Um, the best place for me, I'm most active on Instagram. So you can find me at It's Diera Story on Instagram. I also have a podcast, which, we cover everything, and you can find that there as well. Really everything from just relationships to psychedelics to sex and sexuality to love and motherhood and parenthood. I have my daughter's dad and I do a co-parenting episode where we talk a lot about that. So yeah, if any of your listeners are single moms or just parents themselves, we dive deep into a lot of like the real honest vulnerable stuff. I really like to go below the surface and get to just the real parts of life and what it's like to be a human and doing this thing that none of us have ever done before, and really kind of peel back, lift the veil of perfection and really get to the places that, a lot of us just struggle through, and we struggle through silently, and we hold these things so close to ourselves, and we don't let a lot of
Mhm.
people in because of fear of, as you said, judgment or not being loved or accepted. And once you really start embracing just the imperfections of being a human and the fumbling through it, as you said, like building a business, there were so many moments, there still are so many moments of
Yeah.
my business where I'm like, I have no idea if this is going to land, but we're going with it. And so, yeah, I like to share as much of just the real stuff as I possibly can.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Diera. And we'll link those all in the show notes so you guys can go and follow along. But this has been so much fun. Thank you for joining me, Diera. And I can't wait to have you back on in a couple of weeks' time.
Thanks, Robyn.